Get ready to tune into stories of average men striving for greatness, to become the leaders that are needed in their homes, in their career, and their communities. This is the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the one and only show that brings you real-life advice on how to be a better man. My guest today is the one and only John Seidl. John is a writer, author, and digital media consultant. I'm super excited to get chatting with him. But before we get started, as a man who desires to live up to your full potential, you need a tribe that will challenge you and help you grow. If you haven't joined the Brotherhood of Fatherhood Facebook group yet, be sure to hop on Facebook and search the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Join the most valuable group online where you can get practical and tactical advice to be the father, husband, and leader you are designed to be. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. I have been, speaking of that, you know how they say, I was a client of theirs before they were a client of mine. Right? Like I was a member. I've been a member of the Brotherhood of Fatherhood Facebook group since it's
very early.
Yeah.
Very early.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I definitely endorse people going to that and joining.
Yeah, it's funny. Men in Facebook groups. It's kind of it's an interesting psychological study. You know, there's the guys that just watch everything. It's crazy.
The lurkers.
I'll be like, hey, that guy never interacts or whatever, and I'll get a message from him. Oh, this podcast episode, I blah 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 blah, and then when this conversation, I'm like, I've never seen you do anything in the group, but people are getting a ton out of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm totally cool with lurkers. I'm like, whatever. There's 3,500 guys in the group, and there's about 250 that interact all the time. Yeah. But I have to believe that way more guys are getting more out of it than are interacting.
I mean, even myself, I feel like I go through seasons.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, all right, I'm more active just in general on Facebook, and then sometimes where I'm not.
Right. So. Yeah, and I think it's appropriate. I mean, I'll do Facebook fasts for sure. I'm like, oh my gosh, Amen. I gotta get out of this.
Yeah, I'll go through times where I take like social media off my phone for a little bit. My wife's like, hello, where are you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, before I know it, there's literally sometimes hours have gone by, and I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah, wow. I want to go down this road because it's about living a life of intentionality, right? Like,
absolutely.
Like we can get so lost. I installed a game on my phone. I don't do games at all. And I installed a game that I used to play like 12 years ago. Could it have been that long? I'm old, man. And I installed it just for the airplane ride, because I wasn't sure what the video situation was going to be on my last trip to Costa Rica. So I was like, I'm just going to have a little entertainment. And I'm playing it. I'm having a blast, right? And then I find myself playing it in the hotel while Kim's getting ready. And then I found myself playing it at home. And I was like 3 days back from vacation. And I'm like, man, I just don't feel right. Something's off. I don't feel like I'm getting work done. And I'm like, wow, like every little break, I'm like, and then it's like I'm a zombie. And I lost all control. And I'm like, okay, gone.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that. I've tried to change from playing games or searching social media to listening to audiobooks.
Yeah.
And here's what's interesting. I've tried that a couple times. I've tried to get into audiobooks, and I just, for whatever reason, I couldn't. This time it took.
Really?
And so I was just actually talking with my wife last night. I was showing her, because she's like, man, you're listening to a lot of audiobooks. I'm like, yeah. I in the last 2 months, I've listened to 10 audiobooks. And I'm like, that's a lot. Yeah. But now the other thing, we can get into this later. Actually, I want to get into this later, especially as it relates to anxiety, but is I'm in a season where I gave up drinking, and I have been absolutely floored at how much more time I have on my hands.
From giving up drinking.
And what I mean by that is, whereas in the past, I would maybe come home, put the kids to bed, have dinner, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to kick back and have a few drinks, right? And what I've been able to do is now fill that time with much more productive things, because I'm not as interested in my own relaxation. I've had to teach myself new relaxation techniques. and one of them is listening to audiobooks. Just the other night, I mean, it was beautiful here in Texas. It was about 75 degrees at like 8 o'clock.
Yeah. Unicorn day.
Yeah, exactly. In the middle of summer,
Right.
you know? And so I took the dog on a walk around the neighborhood like twice and listened to an audiobook. And I'm like, you know what? If I were still drinking at this time, I would be, you know, and I'm not even talking about getting drunk, like even just drinking, just, you know, whatever. I'd be in the house, you know, doing that. So we can get into that later, but there's the teaser.
There is a lot of conversation to happen around that because I go through those cycles as well.
Yeah.
And I have some things to say, but I'll just wait. So, like, I've been looking forward to this interview for a while, and I first actually met you digitally because you were doing some editing on a story my wife and I were writing. That was the first introduction I had to you through your father-in-law and mother-in-law, Brian and Edie, who have been huge in our lives. And we went through this writing thing, and I don't know, I like this guy. Like, my wife and I are kind of trying to lay it all out on the line. We write these things about our marriage story, and you're sitting there sending feedback and things. And
I can try to remember it. I didn't tear it apart too much.
No, well, that's the thing. That's got to be a really hard thing to do because you got these people putting emotional stuff on paper, and then you're like, hey, you know, change this and do this. Yeah. And I never felt like, you know, as men, we kind of get something like, oh, you don't know anything, you know, it's fine the way it is. But I never felt that way. I remember Kim and I talking about it, like, this guy's really talented. He really knows what he's doing. And so that was my first introduction to you. And then
I feel like that was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, maybe 2.5.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was this today, oddly enough, is the first time we met in person. We live like 30 minutes away.
I know, right? And yeah, so we were joking, like we get here, we geek out. You know, Scott and I are both, I think you could call us tech heads, if you will. Like, we love our little equipment, especially when we start getting into the podcast and digital media world. Yeah. It's like a rabbit hole. And so we like combined our equipment and doing cool stuff. And we're like, yeah, this is the first time that we've actually seen each other to do a live video podcast.
Yeah, which is cool. This is my first live video podcast, and it's something I've wanted to do for so long. So I'm super pumped, and it's really cool to have another techie nerd guy to like be like, oh, I got this cord, and I have these cameras, and I'm like, sweet. Yeah. I was kind of feeling bad, so I underpacked because I was like, oh, I don't want people to know how big of a nerd I am, and I'm glad you.
And I like have my 2 Pelican cases. I'm like, here, let me grab it out of this one.
Yeah, it was awesome. So man, let's just dive right in. I want to hear about you, your upbringing, your life. Your life as it was. Yeah.
So I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm a Midwest corn-fed boy. A badger. I grew up in Wisconsin. My family makes fun of me because they say since I moved to Texas that I don't sound normal.
You don't sound Wisconsin.
And I'm like, no, guys, I love you. I sound normal. I just realized how abnormal I sounded growing up.
Right.
But there's still times, like my wife makes fun of me. She says whenever I'm on the phone with especially the females in my family, my mom or my sister, that I'll get off the phone. She won't even know like that I've talked to him. She's like, you just talked to your mom, didn't you? You know, and I'm like, yeah, I did. And so, so yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin. My parents divorced when I was about 3. But through that process, and you know, this is a central theme of the book of just how God redeems, the tragedies and the suck in our life. And so that God used that to bring my family to himself. And so my mom met my stepdad. Through that process, she was obviously really heartbroken. My dad had cheated on my mom. And so she started going to this new church and met this guy who later became my stepdad. And and he's the one that really was instrumental in our finding the Lord, if you will, or Lord finding us. And so, but you know, I don't like, listen, there's a lot of crap in my life, right, that I've worked through. I've never really had to work through the divorce in the sense that, like, I was so young. Yeah. Like, I think I have maybe one memory of my dad being around, but, like, you know, my older siblings still have issues that they're working through as a result of that. But, you know, by the grace of God, I haven't, you know. And what's been actually kind of sweet is I've been able to have probably the closest relationship with my dad, because of that, in a sense. So, again, God just kind of redeeming some of the suck. So I'm one of 5 children. So there was 4 of us with my mom and my dad. And then when my mom got remarried, she had my younger brother. And so grew up in an interesting, I would say, with an interesting denominational background. Was very prosperity gospel, and so that even just later in life messed me up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's some of what I work through in the book that we're going to be talking about, and just like a very like name it, claim it, if you have enough faith, you can have anything you want kind of deal, including health. And, and if you don't have that, then there's something wrong in your life, whether it's sin, whether it's, whatever, you name it, So that's the kind of environment I grew up in, and I don't say that like my mom and I have a great relationship. So, it's not like, she knows that we have our differences, but I also would say she's grown in that area. And just my struggles and my family struggles has helped with that. But then, there's kind of a lot of storylines, if you will, in the soap opera. My sister, who was just, so I have 2 sisters, an older sister and then a younger sister, not younger than me, but just the younger of the sisters. And she really got heavy into drugs at a very young age. I mean, we're talking like 13 type stuff. And, we sent her away to like a Christian rehab, like type place for a year. But life was actually pretty hellish growing up because of that. And again, my parents did the best they could, but, my sister just made it hell. I mean, she had behavioral issues that would make behavioral issues have behavioral issues, So, life was, life wasn't, life isn't peachy for anyone, but it was very chaotic. It was very hectic in growing up. I mean, there's times I would literally, go to the top of our farmhouse. I'd sneak up on the window and just like cry, because my sister is just, to the point where I'm like, is she demon possessed?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm serious. Like over the smallest things, like my stepdad would like take her phone privileges away. And like, this was before cell phones. So like,
right.
would just take her landline privileges away. And she would go absolutely insane. So, there's the foreshadowing of like mental health issues are very rampant in the family. So that's kind of the longer, shorter version. I went off to college and, I got away, and I wasn't necessarily planning on getting away. Like I wasn't like running away from I'm actually a kind of a homebody. I love Wisconsin. If we didn't have 6 months of winter, I'd love to be living there, but I just can't do that. Yeah. I'd rather have like 2 months down here in Texas where it's really hot than the 6 months of winter. So, so I was planning on going to a school in Milwaukee, Marquette University, which a lot of people know about. But ended up at a evangelical Christian school in New York City called the King's College. At that time, it was in the Empire State Building, and so I went off. I went off to school in New York City. It was a great experience, and I contribute a lot of who I am today to those years. I think it was healthy for me to be away, and met my wife there. And fast forward, I graduated. She was a year behind me. We got married, and I waited for her to finish out. And in that time, she had transferred out. She was in Denver, so we lived in Denver for a year, and then came back to New York City. And that's kind of where I started my work life and being in digital media.
Yeah, man. I there's so many things, like having read your book.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things I'm like. There are so many things we can touch on. One of the things you mentioned earlier was prosperity, kind of the prosperity gospel. And this is something I've kind of like been watching for a few years.
Yeah.
Having been in some business areas where that was like a big thing, and kind of like peeking in, and then through my own personal growth and watching, it's a pretty dangerous type of, in my opinion, dangerous type of mindset. But the thing that hit me really hard was the story about you and your stepdad in the car when you found out like one of your favorite football players had passed away.
Yeah. So this was, I think it was about my senior year in high school. And, I mean, I can still see the intersection, and we're on Calumet Avenue. There's a BP station, our 76 station on the right. And we're listening to the radios I think it was around Christmas time. And over the radio, and if you watch this on YouTube or wherever, you'll see that there's like a Packers football. We're actually doing this at my house. So there's a Packers football in the back there. And I'm a huge Packers fan. And so over the radio comes, hey, we're so sorry to let you all know this, but Reggie White has died suddenly in his sleep. And, Reggie White was like, he was the man. Not only, I think he's still like second all time in sacks. Yeah. Like total sacks. And he hasn't been playing football since like 99 maybe. And so I was like, oh my gosh, Reggie White died. Like, and this dude was like, not only was like he a great football player, he was a good dude in the sense of he served the Lord, man. They called him the minister of defense, He pastored, at that time he was pastoring a church in, I think, North Carolina. When he was living in Green Bay, he was not only was an active member of his church, but they would give him the pulpit. He would preach on some Sundays. And so, like, not necessarily in, like, I'm not saying he's a good guy, like, he's done all these good things so he shouldn't die, because that's actually the prosperity gospel. But he like, it's just not the type of person you expect to just die in their sleep. And that's what made what my stepdad said so jarring next, which was, he looked at me and he said, man, Reggie White must have had unrepentant sin. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, the Bible promises us 70 years. And so, he was, I don't know, 40 something maybe. And he's like, yeah, the Bible promises 70 years. So if he died, like, he obviously had unrepentant sin or something was going on in his life. And I'm like, no. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so we got into this like big argument in the car. Like, we start yelling at each other. He's telling me like I'm biblically illiterate. I just need to read the Bible. And I'm like, this is stupid. Like, what do you like? Come on. Like God's just waiting to like strike me down. I'm like, I'm in high school. I'm like, so what? Because I lusted yesterday at this woman. Like, what is? I don't think I've repented of that. Right. In fact, I pretty much enjoyed that. Let me just be honest with you. So God's like gonna strike me down. So that was like my first. That kind of set me off. And so, like I said, that was right before I went into college. And so when I talk about college being my formative years in a good way, is that it kind of set me on this path of discovery of like, what does the Bible really say? Especially as it relates to tragedy, especially as it relates to suffering and like, do we cause our own death? So that's the story that really kind of set me down that road.
Yeah. You have quite a few stories in this book, and actually, let me just ask this question, because I went into this book thinking like, hey, it's about rest.
Sure.
Right. It's about anxiety, OCD, struggling with some things that are, can be pretty destructive, or pretty not destructive, but offsetting in the path of your life. And
yeah. I'd say that can be destructive.
Yeah. My mother, her family, just a lot of mental illness in the family. Mm-hmm. And man, I thought like, oh, this book's for other people. And by the end of it, or probably by the first chapter, I was like, wow, this might hit a little harder than I ever thought.
I remember getting that message.
Yeah. I'm like, so, okay. I remember looking at my wife and going, boy, this is a book I think everybody needs to read. So when you were writing this, like, who's your audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so before I like fully answer it, let me just say like, and I know you don't mean this, but I want to make sure everyone realizes like, I'm not saying in writing this book, I'm not like, this is not like some Freudian type thing where I'm like, everyone has a mental health disease. You just don't realize it yet. No, but to answer your question about who the audience is, it's like, but I think there are a lot of people who, even if you don't struggle, you need to understand it better. For either the people in your life that may struggle or for a time when you will, right? I mean, it's not like you either have this or you don't, right? In the sense that like I mean, let's just look at COVID, right? I can't tell you how many messages I've gotten of people who are like, I've never struggled with anxiety or depression or any mental health thing before, 2020.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I will not leave my house. Right? And I got that from a pastor, by the way.
Yeah.
So who is this for? So generally, I would say your main audience is the people who do struggle, right? Who who understand that something is not right, regarding anxiety, OCD, or depression, and so that would be the first one, or who may suspect like something's a little off. And then it's also for loved ones of those who struggle. And in fact, there's a specific chapter for those people, how you can help others, how you can help those that you love who are struggling. And man, there's a fly going around here, guys. I'm just telling you, like,
it's annoying, isn't it?
I'm like, I just want to like,
yeah. So if you see me leash out, and,
yeah, right,
and do
right.
the little,
like I'm gonna catch it.
The chopstick thing,
right? Yeah, exactly. So it's also for, and it's my house, right? It's like my fault. So then it would be the loved ones of those, and then thirdly, just the church in general, I think is kind of the bigger audience, because when I say the church in general, I just mean like people of faith, right? And because Jesus help me,
yeah.
The church has not dealt with this well. And I don't say that from like, I hate the church, like screw you. I'm gonna deconstruct my faith over this. No, like the church has really missed an opportunity here to help people who are struggling in a real practical way. And so I think everyone of faith can read this and say, oh, okay, this is what we can do better to come around those who are struggling.
Well, I was reading it through these eyes of, obviously my faith is, I'm a Christian. I have a very strong belief, but I was like, how would a non-Christian approach this book? But there's so much, your stories, for starters, your stories are going to relate to a lot of people. There's a lot of loss, a lot of tragedy, a lot of personal stuff you work through, family stuff you work through. Something I really appreciate is the fact that you were very open and honest, and, it's vulnerable for your family to be talked about in a book.
Yeah.
But one thing that I really appreciate is when people don't shy away from talking about where churches in general have kind of missed the mark, because it's incredibly important to talk about the things that we've missed the mark on.
Yeah, you can't grow, you can't get better if you don't understand what you're doing wrong. And so, I think that is partly what the church has missed on, right? Is that, like I said, I'm not approaching this from I'm going to bash you guys over the head. I mean, I'm willing to say that there are some people like, man, I didn't even know, right? Like I didn't even realize, like what you wrote helped me realize just that this is a bigger problem. And so I'm not out here pretending that every pastor in every town that hasn't done this well has had like some malicious intent.
Right.
And so hear that, especially maybe you are one of those type of people that's hearing this, is like, this isn't, there are a lot of books, especially recently, that just want to just like tear down, everything in the church is wrong, or you've done this wrong, or you've missed on this issue. And so this is like, let me just rub it in your face and drag you through the mud. That's not what this is at all. There's definitely room for saying like, yeah, maybe you just didn't realize exactly. Maybe you didn't realize that Charles Spurgeon, the Prince of Preachers, had depression. Like, Yeah, I didn't know that before I started really getting into this. I'm like, you know, you hear Charles Spurgeon's name thrown around. You're like, dude, the guy was like really depressed. Like really depressed. Him and his wife wrote about it, you know? So so it's things like that that I'm hoping people realize.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think just listening to your story and knowing kind of how the way your family viewed things, that kind of the church that they were in, and the fact that behind closed doors, things were falling apart. I mean, people were having major issues. You talked about your sister already, and you went through some serious tragedies in your. I don't actually know the years, but I mean, when's the first time you realized, like, wow, like these things I'm thinking or feeling are a little out of the norm?
Yeah, that's a good question. There was definitely a singular moment that where the light bulb went off, like that proverbial moment. But I would say that even growing up, I realized there was always something a little different. I just couldn't put my finger on it, or I didn't know. I hadn't named it, right? So there's even a chapter in the book called "Call It by Its Name," right, and the importance of naming what's going on in you. And I didn't know what was different about me. And so, you know, I just realized I always had a harder time getting over things. And so I just called that I'm just more sensitive, you know. I realized that there's things I wanted to stop thinking about, but I couldn't stop thinking about. And so, you know, there's this line that I say in the book is like, you know, especially growing up in a Christian home, like you're told like live your life at school and everything where like everyone's going to want to like be like you and like see Jesus through you. And it's like, I'm secretly there. Like, I don't know why anyone would want what I have, you know,
Right.
because my life is kind of hellish. If things aren't going perfectly, like I'm a wreck inside. And so like really truly I do not know how I got through high school and college, especially college like in New York City, right? Like the capital of chaos. And so I mean I attribute that to obviously the grace of the Lord, but so that's I just kind of knew there was something different about me, and it just gradually got worse and worse and worse. And then there was this moment with my wife, a few years into our marriage. We had just moved to Dallas, and well, actually, we were about 3 years living in Dallas, and I mean, it's so stupid, but like we went to go for a walk, and we went down. We were living in a loft at the time, and I said, "Hey, you get us coffee. I'm gonna run to the bathroom. There's a little coffee shop in the bottom." And I said, "Hey, just remember, I don't like Splenda." And she's like, "Yeah, I got it. Like I just hate Splenda. I think it tastes like dirty sock water. I think it makes everything it touches taste like dirty sock water, or just like chalky and just like fake. I don't know." And so I'm like, "Make sure they put sweet and low in it." Yeah, I got it. So I run to the bathroom. I come back. She hands me my coffee. I take a drink, and there's Splenda in it, and I just like lose it. You know, like not like I'm punching the walls, you know, screaming at the top of my lungs, but like something happened inside of me that I'm just like, it's Splenda. Like why? And I even like kind of said, like, why are you like getting so, like, why does this bug you so much that there's Splenda in your coffee and not Sweet and Low? And it like ruined the entire day. I mean, I went back up to the apartment. We didn't go on the walk. I sat in silence. I was just so torn up. And, you know, I think it was that night or the next morning, my wife looked at me and she's like, "Listen, something's got to change." Like, I mean, I'm in this. I'm not saying like I'm going to leave you. But I just need to know, like, what am I in for the rest of our lives? Because that's not really what I signed up for. I'm not excited about this, and I'm always walking on eggshells. I don't know, like, what's going to set you off, what's going to throw you into a loop, what's going to, like, make you for 2 days just be in a rut. And she's saying this, like, sobbing through tears. And I'm just like, you're right. And yeah, that's not fair to you. And so I called up my oldest sister, who I remember had kind of telling me that she had struggled with anxiety and OCD. And so I told her what had happened, and she just kind of laughed. She's like, Johnny, that's what my family calls me, Johnny. She's like, Johnny, you have it. And I'm like, really? It's like, yeah, don't you know it runs in the family? And she's just like, like in Matthew where where like they list off the lineage of Jesus, know, this person, this person, this person, this person. And I'm just like, holy cow. And so I made an appointment with a psychiatrist. He heard what I had to say. I talked about some of the other just crazy stuff. And he's like, oh yeah, you have GAD and OCD. GAD is generalized anxiety disorder, and just so like everyone knows, like OCD is a subset, a form, a type of anxiety. So if you have OCD, you have anxiety. You don't necessarily have OCD if you have anxiety, although they do tend to go. I mean, a lot of times they do go hand in hand. So yeah, that was the light bulb moment that made sense, and like I say in the book, like. That moment in front of the psychiatrist where he tells me that was not a sad moment. It was a moment of like jubilation because, bringing it back around is like, you can't fight what you don't name, and sometimes we refuse to name it. We just want to say, I don't want to be the one that has that, I don't want to be labeled that way, and so, but you can't fight what you don't understand, right? And naming it and knowing what you're going up against, it allows you to fight back. And so that was that moment in the psychiatrist's office was that for me. I was like, yes, thank you. Now I know what I'm fighting. Now I know what I'm battling. Now I can put a name to it, and now I can face it.
Yeah, I mean, when I first read that story, it's funny because you're reading through someone else's stories and the things that you would perseverate on, or like, you have a story in there where there was a bump under your car and you're like, you have to drive back and forth because you're just convinced you ran over somebody.
Yep.
I've done those types of things. I've had those types of times in my life. And it's definitely at a different level, but I think everybody can relate to those things. But really what hit me about that whole area, and you hit on it, is naming it, labeling that thing. And growing up with being trained in psychology as well as education, there was so much talk about not letting the kid know that they are, they suffer or struggle with A, B, or C because we don't want to label them.
Yeah.
And so I saw that. I'm like, well, there's a lot of freedom in this.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think also too, like when I talk about my upbringing, I talk about my mom and, even her reaction to all this is like, there's a grace I have to extend there, knowing that that's the way this has been treated, and that's the way this has been viewed, right? Is you don't talk about it, you will get labeled. My mom, even at one point I overheard like, don't get on meds because the insurance companies will label you forever and you'll never be able to get good health insurance. Well, that's like a legit, my mom's in the healthcare business. Like that's a legitimate something that she has witnessed, and so, yeah, don't label it. Don't let people know this is the way it is, but I just keep coming back to like, if you're fighting an enemy and you don't know who or what the enemy is, you're never going to be able to fight back.
Yeah.
It's like the whole, like the Revolutionary War, like when they started fighting in guerrilla war tactics, it changed everything,
right?
Because they couldn't see who they were fighting.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. I remember going through this practice where I was kind of like going through all the things that were really kind of making me not reach new potential, like behaviors, thought patterns, things, and I had to name it. I had to put a name to this person, like, here's all the things all the negative talk that you have, and like, name it. I was like, name it. But the thing is that name hits me like that. When I start to kind of go down that road, I'm like, Chuck. That's Chuck speaking. And so it was really a great way for me to relate to like, yeah, you do have to name your battle. You got to
Yep.
name what you're up against. And I there was a ton of freedom in reading that.
Yeah, and especially for people who are people of faith, right? Like it's something that is since the beginning of time, right? Like the biggest, the biggest mandate, the first mandate to man was like name the animals, right?
Right.
Like why? Okay, Jacob battling on the Jabbok River, right? Like he's like, tell me your name, right? Like he got a limp for the rest of his life because he's like wrestling with this angel saying, tell me your name, right? We inherently just in society, we want to name things. We want to know people's names. What's your name? We give names to our kids because when we give something a name, we then inherently have this power over it. And so I think it's ingrained in us to want to name something. And when we don't do that, we're actually fighting against what has been put in place since the beginning of time.
Yeah. I think it's just so, it's empowering. It's incredible the power of naming it and just attacking it for what it is.
Yep.
So you got started on meds.
I did proudly. And I think that's when we talk about ways that maybe the church has failed, I think that's a big one. It was definitely in the denomination in the prosperity gospel that I grew up in was frowned upon. Don't take meds. That's a sign that you are not having enough faith. If you have enough faith, if you pray hard enough, if you maybe repent about this unrepentant sin that you don't know about, then you will be healed. And that's a load of crap, to put it frankly. And so I got on meds, and I would say that it's so far been one of the best decisions ever. If I'm at an 8 normally without meds, with my anxiety and whatnot, brings it probably down to like a 4. So it's not a magic pill. It's not like I'm never, I don't struggle at all. But it takes the edge off enough that it puts me in a position to do all the other things that I know I need to do, right? And I will say that maybe some people that struggle with taking medication or critics, there is a grain of truth to what their concern is based on, which is, you can't treat it like a magic pill. Well, I agree with you. I don't treat it as a magic pill. I know I have to work out. I know I have to eat better. I know I have to do the spiritual surgery that's required to get to uproot, all the other crap in my life as well. But guess what? If I'm not on my meds, I'm never going to be able to do all those things. I'm never in a position to eat right, to be able to work out, to do the spiritual work. I'm just not in a position. So it gives me a foundation to be able to do all the other work.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that because I think there's this, this easy fix.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely, you talk about that. This is not an easy fix. You got to do the work.
Absolutely. And I want people to hear that of like, if you're struggling with this, I would recommend you talking to your doctor or psychiatrist, right? But know that you're still going to have to do the work. I have to do the work continually, every single day. And that's not like medication. Anxiety, OCD, depression is a physical and a spiritual problem. But I have to address the physical before I can ever address the spiritual. Addressing the physical allows me to address the spiritual. But like you said, you have to do the work.
So what's your, yes. Yeah. I mean, you talk about the church kind of poo-pooing medication and dealing and working through that. But quite honestly, being in the fitness world that I've been in, there's a lot of people in that sector like, hey, like if you get fit, everything's going to be fixed.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think there, some of that's a marketing message. Like this is, but it's. I think a lot of these things like medication medication definitely fixes a neurological, like physical thing.
Yeah, an imbalance in your brain
Yeah,
and pathways that are absolutely.
But the big picture is like, hey, this is a huge rock. Whatever your work up against, it's a big rock. You got to get the rock moving.
Yeah.
And it's probably the best way to start is meds, because then you're going to have the willpower, the time, the energy to start exercising. Then you're going to have the focus to start watching your nutrition, or vice versa. It's just one of those things. Let's get the rock moving.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of look at it as a stool. You know, I even have this like rudimentary picture in the book. That's if you like pictures, that's the one picture you're going to get in the book. And in fact, a little behind the scenes, like I had like drawn it on my computer when I turned it in. The publisher's like, do you know someone else who could like do this maybe a little better? And I'm like, yeah, my sister-in-law's a graphic designer. Let me get her to do it. But I do it as a stool. Like there's 3 legs of the stool that support your mental health, and it's a brain, body, and spirit. You need all 3 of them, right? A 3-legged stool with only one leg is going to topple. With only 2 legs is going to topple. So I think there's always a tendency in whatever environment you're in. You know, it's like mom blogs. Like when we first got pregnant, it's like you can find a mom blog that will tell you exactly like what you want to hear. And then you'll find another one who vehemently disagrees. And like they all vehemently say that their way of getting your child to sleep through the night is the best way.
Right.
You know? Right. And so it's like, yeah, if you tend to be more into fitness, like you're going to hear a lot more from the fitness community saying, well, all you need to do is like, you know, CrossFit a little bit more, you know, do a little more AMRAPs, you know, get the GIP going, you know, and you'll be good, you know? Or more on the nutrition side. Well, yeah, if you just like cut out carbs and if you go only organic, you know, it's all the GMO's fault, you know? And so my point would be like, you need all of it.
Yeah.
It all matters.
Yeah. Well, and you can avoid extremes, which can send you down the wrong path anyway. Like, there's a real balance, I believe, that's needed. Mm-hmm. So how long you been on medication now?
So that was in 2014. So
quick math, it's like 7 years.
7 years. Yeah. And what I would say is like I hope one day I don't have to take meds. I do. Like, I hope that I can get off of them. I hope, you know, I'm a person of faith. Like, I hope that God miraculously one day heals me. So far, that doesn't happen. So now what? You know what I mean? One, I have to put in the work. And 2, like, I have to trust that, like, whatever he wants me to continue to learn, like, I haven't got it, so maybe I have, like, a real thick skull.
Right.
Or he just knows that, like, you know what? Like, you know, Paul talks about in the Bible, like I was given this thorn. Like, maybe this is just my thorn. Like, the Lord needs me to continue to have it to keep me humble or to keep me whatever, you know, continually turning towards him. And in that way, I've learned to be thankful for it in a sense, to say like, wow, I need to be thankful. Like this has softened me. It has given me a sense of empathy. I'm reading a great book right now on just how like like some of the greatest leaders, and I actually mentioned the book in my book, like have had mental illness and mental health challenges, and one of the great byproducts of it is the empathy that you're able to feel for other people who are struggling, not just with mental health, but just in general.
Yeah.
And so I think like maybe without my anxiety, I'm a jerk. I mean, I can be a jerk no matter what, right? But, you know, like maybe I'm just, you know, I don't know. The person I am without this, I need to trust the Lord that is like way worse than the person with it.
Yeah, I look at it from the outside, having read your book already, having a family, a side of my family that struggled. I've been on meds for anxiety, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm like, this is a gift. Like, if you hadn't experienced this book wouldn't come out, and this book hasn't even been released yet. Yeah, and I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and this is exactly, they need to read these words. So like for me, it's like, yeah, you had to go through this because this is a gift. This is something that's going to help other people. So I was on. I'm really bad at terminology, but what is it? The blocker. So some sort of
S something RI.
Yeah. Let's just call them SRIs.
Yeah.
So I was on SRIs for 12, 13 years. But I was living in Oregon, and Oregon's beautiful. but it's not sunny.
Oh my gosh.
It is gray and dreary 9 months of the year. The summers are phenomenal there, but 9 months out of the year, there's one of the 28 forms of rain happening.
Yeah.
And with rain comes clouds, and we're not talking about like the Texas clouds. Like we have like 3 days a year in Texas that are like the Oregon days, and I'm like, oh, this is horrible. It's gray. Like the only color you see is gray.
And that's how it is in Wisconsin too.
Okay.
When I talk about the 6 months of winter,
Yeah.
and that's another reason I couldn't.
Oh, yeah.
It's just gray.
Yeah. And I just found myself like just down and anxious, really anxious, snapping at things, like snapping. And you talk a little bit about that, but like the Splenda episode is like, okay, I've had a lot of those.
By the way, guys, on the way here yesterday, Scott promised to bring me coffee with Splenda.
Couldn't help it, man.
This could have been a real interesting podcast.
There's a few things. One, at one point you talk about your sausage fingers, and I'm like, yeah. Have you seen the typos in my text?
I know.
Like, it's fat thumbs. There's no way around it. And
yeah, everyone's like, you're a writer. You shouldn't have that many typos. I'm like, have you seen my thumbs?
Those keyboards, like I'm hitting three numbers at the same time, or three letters.
It's really just a crapshoot what it's going to put there.
It is. And the funny thing is my phone has started auto-correcting like and to SND. So if I type and right, it does SND.
Oh,
because
that is funny.
I hit SND so many times.
That is funny.
So I really related on that. Another one is, and I can't let these go because they're just so funny. You talk about your wife being 5'8".
Yeah.
So I'm 5'6" on a good day, maybe 5.5.
That's kind of right. Like Scott, but like we told you, like we had never met in person. Scott walks through my door. I'm like, thank you, Lord.
Man, when I have a few stories about that. My wife's 5'8", smoking hot, very, very fit, like complete opposite of me.
Yeah.
So this one day I have to tell a story. I'm sure I've told it in the podcast like 8 times, but it's just the best. I'm walking in Northwest. We had Fred Meyer's. So I'm walking into Fred Meyer, my favorite store at the time, because you could go there and get anything. And so I'm walking in. I'm with my wife. I'm holding her hand. And I just start chuckling. And there's this guy probably like 15, 20 feet in front of me. And he's there. So he's shorter than the woman he's with. His wife or woman, I'm like, man, she's good looking. And I look at my wife. I'm like, man, he married up. Like literally, she's taller than him.
Yeah.
He's not a good looker. Look at her. And then I just started busting up laughing. She's like, what? I'm like, that's me.
Yeah.
That guy's legend. Yeah. So I totally related. You're like, yeah, I got this wife. She's 5'8". I'm like, so it took me
tall, blonde, I'm just like short, stocky,
Yeah. Yeah. But, I've the older I've got, the more I've been settled into that. And I'm just.
I think people like you and me have never met a BMI index that we like.
No.
You know what I mean? Like the BMI index hates people like us who are short, but like thicker.
Yeah.
Just like, according to the BMI, like I should be 175 pounds. I was 175 pounds in like 6th grade.
Yeah.
But I've never been like, I'm not obese. Well, I mean, technically, according to the BMI.
BMI will tell you are.
I'm obese. But like you look at me and you're like, oh, I shouldn't be on like a TLC show or something. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I was in the fitness industry and I'm doing body fat percentages, and I did this test and I'm like, my body fat was great. It was right where it needed to be. This is when I was in my 30s. But if I looked at my weight and my height, I was moderately obese.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like what is wrong? I do have to tell you, I have a torso. My nipple to belly button ratio. This is my new measurement, by the way.
Okay.
Is pinky tip to thumb tip.
Oh, now
literally.
Like if I'm.
Yeah. So nipple to belly button. So I have no torso.
Yeah, I'm about that too.
Isn't that
if you're watching, you can see. I'm like,
yeah, like seriously, I can touch both at the same time. So my theory is, especially for like, we have all our internal organs that have to live in a much smaller space.
That's very true. Although I have one less of them now.
I wanted to talk about that. That was this perfect segue.
Yeah, that is actually a perfect segue. So, I'm like, well, hopefully I made a little bit more room.
Well, you should be skinnier, man.
Well, listen. So we'll get to this. But I donated a kidney.
I know.
And like when I was actually literally going into this, I'm like, man, they're gonna take this kidney out, and like I'm gonna like be 10 pounds lighter as soon as I do this. And then I realized, I like looked up like the size of a kidney. It's like a chicken breast. and not like a heart, not one of those Tysons that they're beefing up, you know, right. like it's just like a little like puny chicken breast. And I'm like,
that's so disappointing.
Dang it. I thought, you know, listen, I'm doing this for all the right reasons, but if I lose 10 pounds because they take a kidney out, you know, like double you see those bonus. Pictures of lungs, you know, lungs are like bigger than you think.
Right,
kidneys are
huge.
Smaller than you think.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. So I'm like doing my Facebook thing, and here's John with a post about like, oh, I'm giving my kidney, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what relative, you know, oh, does he have a kid that needs a kidney, or you know, you go. That's the first thing you go to, and I never asked you about it. I didn't really follow it, and then this year you did like a time hop post, and you also had a guy walking, and you're like, hey, this is a guy that couldn't walk before. I'm like, well, the guy's black. He is not related. And I was like, I'm like, I think he just did this. I'm like, Kim, I think John like gave his kidney just straight up to be an awesome dude. And she's like, yeah, probably.
Yeah. So, I donated to a stranger, a guy I'd never met. And so the story goes like this. So my stepdad, who I mentioned earlier on, when I was younger, you know, this is preteens, he went into kidney failure, and he had to be on dialysis for years until he got a kidney transplant from his sister, my aunt. And so I've always had a gratefulness and a thankfulness for people who are willing to donate, you know, organs. And I've also lived and been on the side of life where you are waiting for one, where, you know, you're part of the family that's like, especially kidneys, you know, you go through dialysis and it's 3 times a week. It's, you know, 4 hours at a time. And it literally and figuratively sucks the life out of you. I mean, it's like it takes your blood, your entire blood, and filters it, you know? And so about 2.5 years ago, my biological father posted on Facebook that he had a friend who needed a kidney. And this one was down in Georgia, and they needed someone with type O blood, which I have. And without really thinking about it. Oh, and in addition, my niece, who's 3, was born with a defective heart and had to get a heart transplant as a newborn. So just the idea of like transplant and understanding all that has just always been in the background of my life. And so when I saw this post from my dad, it's like the woman needs an O donor. I knew I had O blood, and I was just like, okay. Like, it was like, just click on here, fill out the form. So I was working from an office, you know, back in the old days when people used to work in offices. And it was like a co-working space, actually. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I clicked on the form and I filled it out, and it was like, oh, thanks for submitting to be a kidney donor. We'll let you know. And so like I go home and I get the quintessential, like, how's your day at work from my wife? And I'm like telling her, I was like, oh, you know, this. And I said, oh, yeah, and I signed up to be a kidney donor today. And she looks at me, she's like, what? And I'm like, as soon as I said it, I'm like, I probably should have checked with her first. You know, like, that's I don't recommend signing up to be an organ donor. Like, I mean, on your license, sure, but like a living donor, like, oh, I'm just gonna go, you know, give some of my liver or whatever. And so that was some interesting conversations because she had a lot of questions, you know, and me, like, having grown up around a kidney donation, like here's what's interesting. It's the most common, like the most needed, and it's the safest. It is, they do a ton of them, you know, and so you live a very normal life afterwards. And so I knew that. And so I was like, to me, I'm just like, I mean, if I'm a match, like,
it's a no
great.
Risk proposition.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, to make a long story longer, I then started going through that process. Like, you know, you go through several rounds of matching, you know, is your blood, is it this? Are you healthy? Are they healthy? Blah, blah, blah. And so I started getting into that process for this woman, my dad's friend. And as it started getting into like, was like, they would do like what's a tissue called a tissue match, which basically like I go in and I get like, you know, gallons of blood drawn and they tested for everything. And they put our bloods together and see if they like attack each other, you know. And right before I was slated to go in to get that done, that woman called me and she said, hey, so someone else was getting tested ahead of you and they ended up being a match. So we don't need you. I'm like, okay, well, my wife might be, you know, relieved.
Yeah.
Right. And she said, but throughout this process, someone at my husband's work reached out to him because they had heard about us needing a kidney and just said, hey, this was a woman. She's like, hey, I'm looking and we're looking for a kidney for my husband. Let us know if you hear of anyone that's willing to donate. And so when she calls me up to tell me that they don't need me, she's like, do you mind if I pass your information on? He's like in Mississippi, so it's a little closer. And I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, again, didn't say anything to my wife, but I'm like, hey, you know, it's kind of like as a kid, you know, if like kids, you know, you're like, Daddy, can I have a treat? Yeah, you can have a treat. And then like 3 days later, they're like, what are you doing in the treat box? You told me I could have a treat 3 days ago. Like, doesn't that still carry over, you know? So that's kind of how I treated it. But, and so I said, sure. So I never met this guy. Like we kind of, she hooked us up on text and we started texting and, come to find out he's about 60 something years old and he lives in Mississippi. I was especially kind of drawn to them because they lived or were from the Hattiesburg area, which I'm a big Packers fan. So Brett Favre is, you know, Hattiesburg's finest. So I'm like, well, maybe one day I'll be able to meet Brett. And so we start to get to know each other, and sure enough, like I start going through the testing, and like I'm a match, which is. My understanding is how I've read everything in these studies is that it is a little bit more difficult to match with someone who is cross-racial. Just because there are, you know, different, whether it's, you know, different genetics, things in their genetic past, right, that are passed down, different from us. And so, but we were still a match. Wow. So I was like, okay, God, all right. And so just kind of kept going through the process, and then it like came to a grinding halt. And that was because his kidney failure was caused by diabetes. And diabetes just wreaks havoc, obviously, on your extremities and everything. And so long story short, he had to started with his toes. It ruins your circulation. Toes amputated, feet amputated, ankles amputated, all the way up to his knees amputated. So that whole process was like a year or so of him going through all that. And then like the transplant clinic calls me up. They're like, okay, we're ready. Like, give us your BMI, you know? And they're like, and I gave him my BMI, which is already like, you know, a crappy indicator for someone, you know, with my build. And they're like, ooh. Okay, we need you to lose some weight, which I kind of expected, but I didn't expect them to call me up and be like, okay, we're ready. Like, I thought they would can you give me the 3-minute warning, you know, the 2-minute warning, you know, like, hey, things are looking good. You may want to start, you know, not eating chips. And so I had to take about 3 months July, August, September, October, probably 4 months to get healthy, to be able to donate. And so October of 2020, I went to New Orleans and met him for the first time.
Wow.
And gave him a kidney. And now, like, his life, you know, it's just incredible. And I was telling someone this the other day, like, I don't tell this story to say, like, John is great.
Right.
I tell this story because, like, I know, like, I'm not great. Like, I, like, talk to my wife. She'll be like, yeah, he can be selfish. Like, yeah, you know, like, he can, you know, the anxiety crap, you know, like the fact that God uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect plan it blows me away. And so, you know, like I even just like, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I gotta get off the sauce for a little bit, you know, like I'm not treating this in the most healthy way recently, you know, it's like, and yet God still uses me. And so that's why I love telling the stories. Like you as well. I know that like there are people listening who are like, man, I'm messed up, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm messed up too. And so now he's walking. He wasn't able to walk. He had prosthetics, but with the dialysis, he had no energy to learn how to use them. He couldn't even sleep for like 5 years. He didn't sleep in his own bed because of the way the fluid builds up when you don't have kidneys. If he was laying down, like the fluid just like would pool. So he had to sleep in a recliner chair for 5 years, and now the guy can sleep in his bed and walk. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's powerful. It's awesome. You mentioned, kind of talking with your wife through this, and how has your struggles or your mental, I guess we call it mental illness. Is it okay to call that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a proponent of calling it that, because it goes kind of to call it by its name. Like it loses its stigma the more we
right.
Like, yeah,
right.
I have a mental illness.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very freeing. I mean,
yeah.
My mom is very clear, very upfront about like, I have this disorder, and it makes some people uncomfortable. But I'm like, hey, like she feels great. She's happy to tell people, most of the time, and so it's good to know.
Right? Yeah. Like, bring it on.
But you marriage is tough. Raising kids is tough.
Mm-hmm.
Add a little extra element. So let's talk about your relationship with your wife before and after, like a PD BD and AD.
Yeah.
Before
diagnosis, after diagnosis.
Yeah.
I think it's either Wedding Crashers or Anchorman. Maybe Wedding Crashers, where Vince Vaughn, like Dorothy Mantooth is a saint. Where he's talking about his mom, like Brett Seidl is a saint. And I'm, like you talk about how like the Lord can bring two personalities. If I'm like an extrovert, like I'm outgoing, I formulate my thoughts as they're coming out of my mouth. My wife is the opposite. She's quiet, she's reserved, she's very intentional. Whereas I'm sporadic and whatnot. And so God brought us together perfectly because she balances me out well. But it's really interesting because especially through this book, and there's part of me that like hates this word because I feel like it comes across as so churchy and like there's so many connotations to it. But in a way, like she's kind of developed a type of ministry to people who, especially wives, who have husbands who are like me. Mm-hmm. And she's been able to speak into their lives. And so what she talks about is just like it was tough, before we named what was going on, before then I was able to fight back. Like her life was pretty crappy, and there's still like, I have to fight back sometimes some shame associated with that.
Absolutely.
And just realize like, hey, like let that go. Like there's some, like you didn't know, that doesn't absolve me from like every wrong thing I did, but her life changed drastically and dramatically after I got on medication. I think that's something people like, your decision to fight this doesn't affect just you. Like if you decide like you're not going to do everything it takes to fight back, like that's not just a you decision.
Right.
That's a decision that affects your wife and your kids and your sisters and brothers and your mom and your dad, And so like don't just like, I talk about in the book, like how some of these disorders are inherently self-focused, and like take the focus off yourself a little bit sometimes, I need to be reminded of that.
Yeah.
And so like there are still times, Scott, like this happened like 2 months ago. She was the first person to read the book once it was finished, and once she read it, she had to go back. She had to go back to counseling, and I remember when she first told me that, again, some of the shame, she's like, listen, I just realized, like, after reading the book again, I realized I have some unresolved things that I need to work through about how hellish life was before you started fighting this. Yeah. Before you started fighting back, really. And again, like, at first I'm like, I heard you resent me. You resent me for something I couldn't really control or didn't know how to control. She's like, no. Like, I'm not saying this to shame you. I'm not saying that. But there are things in my life, like John, you don't know what it's like to be married to someone with this. I do, And so that's especially, we go back to talking about the audience for the book. There is a lot of stuff in there for people of loved ones, So there is one specific chapter reserved, but really the idea is reading this is going to help other people understand what it's like to live with this. And so I think there's mutual understandings that take place as you understand yourself better and what you're going through, and as that person understands what's going on and understands it better, like your relationship can grow and come more into alignment. So, there's one thing that she says in there. She says, listen, I remember we were on a walk. This was during like the height of COVID. So, it's like all you could do was like a walk, Yeah. So we're like on a walk around the neighborhood.
We walked a lot during COVID.
Yeah. And she's like, we were getting, I don't know what, there's so many round of edits that the book goes through. So I don't know what round we were on. And I said, so they're asking me like any other things I want to add. And she looks at me, she's like, you have to add that the family members need to go to counseling.
Oh, that's good.
And she said, even if they think they have it all figured out and resolved, like, okay, whatever, you pay $90, and just to make sure, like, $90 insurance policy is a pretty cheap insurance policy, and she said, because there are so many, I realized there are so many unresolved feelings that once you got better, I was just like, okay, things are great, done. Yeah. And that wasn't a healthy way to deal with them.
Yeah, there's a lot that happens leave in the wake through the years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a few things more that I want to talk about before we wrap this up. And how is your? Well, actually, let me go this direction. In the book, you talk about lamenting. You talk about a few things that really hit a chord for me. And I told you I was on meds for 12 years. 2 years ago, I started getting off of them. But to what you said, I had long conversations with my wife, very intentional, very, very, very long taper off, like a 2-year taper off, a year and a half, like, because it changes your system. I mean, it's incredibly powerful, but mine I was able to do because now I'm in the sun all the time. So I'm getting the serotonin. It's definitely making a huge difference, right? In Oregon, that wasn't the case. But communication. I mean, I was with like, hey, I just dropped, X amount of grams. I want all feedback. And it was phenomenal because she'd be like, hey, you're getting a little tense. You're really, really sharp. You're really hitting back. So it's this long journey. So it goes the same with walking through, starting your medications and going to counseling and having those conversations. I really like what you said about your wife, what she said about like spouses need to go and go through a process as well.
Yeah.
Because it can be a incredibly demanding time in your life, being with somebody who has a mental illness.
Yeah, and I think also the person that is the struggler, the sufferer, like especially, I know that when your house is on fire, it's like you got to treat the fire, right? Yep. But once your house is not on fire, then you got to start the remediation process.
That's a great analogy.
And so that remediation process can be long. It can take a lot of form. You got to bring in the fans. You got to, restore some furniture. And so that was kind of what it was like for us. Like there was a let's get the house to stop burning, and then we got to start the remediation process.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message for people out there.
Yeah.
I think even it goes outside of spouses. I think it goes to, mothers, fathers, siblings. So you also mentioned, I want to talk lamenting. Like, you go back into the Bible and talk a lot about lamenting, but it was really, for me, really freeing. I just want to give you, I want you to understand how important this is. You talk about it's okay to lament.
Yeah.
It's like I got permission to be like, oh, this right now sucks, God. Why are you doing this? Like, what's wrong with you?
I know, and it's like I don't think it kind of goes to there's this idea also as a current throughout the book of just kind of this proper theology of suffering.
Yeah.
And again, remember growing up in a prosperity gospel, like we didn't have a proper theology of suffering. In fact, there was no theology of suffering. It was like, you suffer? No, like pretend you don't suffer,
right?
Because if you pretend enough, then the Lord will honor that, And that's called having faith, apparently. Lamenting is saying is kind of this emotional response to God that says, God, this sucks. Like, why is this happening? And it's letting your emotions out, And I talk about how like when Jesus died, as he's dying on the cross, says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's a lament.
Yeah.
And that's not me saying that. That's like theologically, that's accepted as like the Lord was lamenting to his Father. Like, so if Jesus, who like knew how the entire story was going to end, right? Like knew what the purpose was, knew that like he wasn't going to stay in the grave, and yet it's like, God, why? And if you look at the Psalms, I think there's an important there's important answer to the question of why lament. Why? Like, I'm saying, like, get pissed at God. It's okay to be pissed at God. Like he can handle it, right? And so, like, if you look at and I think it's either Psalm 13 or Psalm 113. I'm drawing a blank right now, but I mention it in the book and lay it out. It's not a long psalm. I think it's like 3 or 4 stanzas, and it's like David starts out like, God, like, where are you? Why have you left me? What is going on? And by the end, again, of this short psalm, he's like, but I will praise you. Like, you're amazing. So he goes from like, God, where are you? This sucks, to, man, God, you're so good. And so it's like, why is that? And I think the answer is that, like, in our laments, in our cries out to God to say, like, this sucks, this isn't fair, why is this happening? We become closer to him. It like forces us to acknowledge that, like, he is the only one that can make this right. He is the only one that can make sense out of this. By crying out, you're acknowledging that someone else is on the other line. Someone else is listening, And so that's why I love, like I knew there was a book called Lamentations in the Bible, but like, I'm like, the word itself, lament, kind of sounds like old school, like Southern Baptist, jingo or lingo, and I'm like, what does a lament mean? And that's what it is. It's just crying out to God and saying, this isn't right. I don't like this. Help me. And in that process of simply just crying out, you become closer to God.
Well, my favorite scene in a movie, just because, well, Forrest Gump has so many great scenes.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there's so many, but I call it a Lieutenant Dan moment.
Yeah.
I mean, Lieutenant Dan, there's a storm coming, and that's where he just lets loose on God. He's like, hey, like, you screwed everything up in my life. Come and take me, bring it, whatever.
Yeah.
And I've had some Lieutenant Dan moments. I think we all have, if we're honest.
Yeah.
And I don't think we need to feel ashamed or like we've done something wrong. What I've done after I started reading that, for the last 2 years, I've been doing this, what I call extreme gratitude. So I have this practice every single day, and it's like a 15-minute process of just, for me, it's thanking God. That's the way I express gratitude. That's all I do for 15 minutes. But I'm always trying to like add habit stacking, add the next thing to what I'm doing. And I read that. And I'm like, man, I do that now. Like I go through my gratitude, but then I'll do I call it my lament period. My
Your
period
lament
of
session.
Yeah. But it's super short because I'm like, I'm so at that point, I'm so overwhelmed with joy. But there's a lot of freedom in being like, you know what? Not everything is perfect.
Yes.
There's just a ton of freedom there. And I think it's going to help me identify, in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 years. Wow, I used to lament over this thing, and look at where it is now. Look at what's happened in that time. And then we have so much more joy and gratitude because we were able to identify and really be like, hey, this is stupid. This sucks. God,
Right.
why do I have to go through this? This is dumb.
Right.
I've learned my lesson. Thank you.
Yeah.
Move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of just to put bow on that, like I talk about how like there's a difference between questioning God and asking God questions, and like lamenting is asking God questions.
Well, that's good.
And now questioning God is deeper, right? It's like that goes to the heart of like, are you even there? And not just like, even that can be like a question, but like doubting like if there is a God, right?
Right.
And I think that's more deeper, and that's more than a lament. But to me, like asking God questions, fire away. Like fire away. Yeah, God, where are you? Are you there? Like, what's going on? Like, ask questions, because by asking questions, you're acknowledging that there is someone there, that there is someone who can answer them.
Yeah, that's good. Right on, man. So I always end these interviews with a few questions.
Okay.
All right. So it's funny because before I even started this podcast, I don't know how many interviews, but I picked men that I knew who had raised children who were fully grown children, and who I felt had done a good job. And one of those was Brian, your father-in-law.
Yeah.
And so I asked him this, and I called it the Legacy Project, and I didn't release any of the information. I just it was me data gathering, right? Just doing a lot of interviews, talking them in. And so it's come full circle now. So I ask every man that I interview on the podcast this question. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because one of the first guys I asked was Brian.
Yeah.
But, at this point, I got to ask him in real time. But what I'm asking you is, when you are retired and your kids are full grown, what is if you were to peek into their lives, peek into the future and see them full grown, what do you see that means you've done your best job as a father?
So I'm going to take this a little differently. I think that there may be some people that answer this question like if they're following Jesus, like I've done my job, and I've kind of come to the conclusion of like, no, God has done his job, right? I think sometimes we put this immense pressure on ourselves as parents, and especially as fathers, that like I control and am responsible for my child's salvation, and it's like it's absolutely a falsehood. Like if I could make anyone, I can't make anyone follow Jesus, right? Now I want that for them, right? And I can be an example. So I think initially it's like I do want to look back, and I pray and I beg the Lord that he would draw them to himself, and that would be the case. I think that I do have a responsibility. Like there's kind of this paradox or this paradigm of like where like the Lord has invited me into that process, and so I need to do my part as well. But honestly, I would say this, especially because I want them if they are real and honest about who they are and what they can't do, I think I'll have done my job. And so this is what I mean. It's like I was talking to someone who has a child my daughter's age. I think she's around 6. She's like, oh, so she wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She has decided that. And I'm like, she's like, oh, so what does Annie want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. Like one day she wants to be a veterinarian. Like one day she wants to be an astronaut. Like the other day, And so like there's going to come a time where like Annie grows up, and I'm like, baby, you can't be an astronaut. Like, I'm sorry, your math skills suck, or like, you know what? You can't be a veterinarian. Like you don't, that requires a certain set of skills that you just don't have, and that's okay. And so I want them to be real and on. Like, if I have taught them and trained them to understand, like you can't do everything, right? And so it kind of ties back into the idea of like why I feel like that's important is because of their salvation, right? Like when you realize you can't do everything, you have to turn to the one who you know can, right? Like when you realize you're messed up, you have to turn to the Lord. And so I'm hoping this answers the question, but it's like, I want them, and hopefully it doesn't sound like a Debbie Downer, but like, I want them to understand they have limitations, and they have more limitations than I think even society tells them. I think we're actually kind of in this weird culture of like, you can do and
be whatever you want.
Yeah. And it's like, that's such crap.
Even if if you're a boy, you can be a girl.
Right.
I'm like, come on.
So it's like, no, you can't be anything you want. You have to recognize your limitations. Don't be defeated by them. It just means like that closed door is an opportunity for this open door. And so I want to look back, and if they are people who understand their limitations, understand they are weak. One of my favorite, I actually think I mentioned this in the book. One of my favorite sermons of all time was like, it was this pastor, and he's like, I hear people talking about how religion and faith and Christianity is a crutch for the weak. He's like, and I look at them and I'm like, heck yeah, it is. You just don't realize that your legs are broken, right? Like, we all have broken legs. Like, yes, I need a crutch. It's definitely a crutch for the weak because we're all weak.
We're screwed up.
Right.
I mean, we all have our things.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's good. And it totally butts in the face of this, my kid can be whatever they want to be. We get that in the group. Guys will be like, well, I tell them they can be whatever they want to be. And there's this real fine balance of breaking down, but also equipping. And equipping means like there's some reality involved in like, okay, well, if you do want to do that, here's where you're at now, and here's where you need to be.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty big chasm there.
Yeah.
So, hey, if that's something you want to do, then it's time to get to work.
Right.
And typically it's like, oh, no, thank you. I don't want to be good.
Yeah, it's not like I want to be an astronaut. Okay, what are you going to do to achieve that, right? And if you get to a certain point and you haven't put in the work for math, guess what? You're not going to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
It's
not a magic equation. Just tell them they can do it, and they can. It's more of equipping them to better understand themselves, their skills, and what they need to get where they want to go.
Absolutely.
So I can totally respect that. That's cool. I don't quite remember what Brian said, but it wasn't the same thing, which is good. He's your father-in-law.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, man, talk about the book a little bit. Let's talk through the title. I know it's Finding Rest. I didn't memorize the rest of it. So
yeah. So it's called Finding Rest: A Survivor's Guide to Navigating the Valleys of Anxiety, Faith, and Life. And so, I mean, it's been an incredible journey so far. And this isn't a testament to me. It's a testament to the people like you and the people that are listening to this right now. But the week it went on pre-order, it went to the number 110 book on all of Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's been number one in several categories. Like the one that it was number two to was like number 2 to Oprah's book. And so just been blown away by the response. And I think I really think it is like people are struggling with this on a level that they never were before COVID. People are being exposed to it. Like I said, even if you're, for every person that goes through this, there's 1 to 3 loved ones that are now forced to try to understand what this is, right? So we're seeing this at a level not before seen. And even now, like we're in Texas, right? And it's like you think, oh, I mean, COVID's kind of going away. And then like you see, this governor and that governor want to bring back mask mandates. And I'm not saying that to be political, but I'm like, just when you think it's kind of gone, like if you thought, even people who are like, well, okay, I had anxiety during COVID, it's kind of going away. And it's like, now you turn on the news and it's like, it's like PTSD. It's like flashbacks. Right. It's starting to happen again, So if you want, it's in pre-orders right now, which what that means is if you go and order a copy right now, you're not going to get it tomorrow. You'll get it when it comes out. But the reason that pre-orders, there's a few reasons. Like I'll just be like really transparent about why pre-orders are important. One is for you in that like especially with Amazon, like let's say you buy it right now, and I think it's on sale for $15.99, right? But like Amazon always runs sales and stuff like that to try to generate whatever they want to do. So let's say it goes to $13.99 next week, like you will get it at the $13.99
Oh, that's
price.
cool. Did not know that.
Yeah. So when you pre-order a book like that, it kind of locks in. You will get the cheapest price. So that's good news for you. And the good news for us is like if you are listening to this and you believe in the message of what I'm talking about, if you believe that mental health is important, if you have someone in your life, like the more the pre-orders are a signal to everyone out there, to the New York Times, to the Wall Street Journal, to booksellers, to other publishers and whatnot, that like, oh, this is a topic that is important.
Yeah.
Because Scott, like, I was rejected by a lot of publishers for this book.
Mm-hmm.
And now some of them were like, it's not because they didn't understand the importance of the topic, but they were like, yeah, you don't have a big enough following, you know? And we've gotten to a place in publishing where it's like, if you don't have 1 million Instagram or, you know, Twitter and Facebook followers combined, like they're like, it doesn't matter how good the book is, right? And so there was one publisher, I won't bash them, but a very big Christian publisher who wanted the book. They lost a fight with marketing because marketing's like, you don't have a big enough following. And so when the book shot up to number 110 on Amazon, all, you know, in 1 week of pre-orders, there was a little sinful side of me that was like, see, take that, you know?
Yeah.
But it's things like that that will show not just the community that this book, you know, that's kind of around this book now, but the wider community. I mean, can you imagine seeing a book like this on the New York Times bestseller list and people being like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I have been struggling with this. And I think the reason this is different is for a lot of the reasons that you just said, when you introed, is like, I don't approach it from a clinical perspective, although I talk about science. I don't approach it from a pastoral perspective, although I talk about faith. You know, I'm talking about it from like I've been through the fire. And by the way, I still go through the fire at times, you know, like I'm still running through it. And so it's a unique take on this where the field has generally been dominated by, you know, counselors or PhDs or doctors or pastors. It's like, man, I'm a regular guy like you that has gone through this, and here's what I've learned.
And I think that's powerful. I think a lot of people will always reach to PhDs or doctors or clinicians, but I think there's so much power in this is how the normal person who's walked through and walking through this fire has it's coming from somebody you can relate to. The other thing I was amazed by, I saw all the rankings, and I asked you, like, when's the release date? And I was like thinking it's like next week because of the rankings. I'm like, the rankings are, people are amped up. It's coming. You're like September 20 something. I'm like,
September 28th. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, so I had sent out a good number of texts to people, like with that screenshot. I'm like, you got to get this book. And you were like, all right, I ordered it. When is it coming out? I'm like, so I texted you and I asked. I was like, yeah, it's and I'm already reading it, so I'm sorry, I'm not sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I literally, because I'm engrossed in it. This is how impactful it is. I'm talking to people about it, and they're like, I want a copy. I'm like, no, I'm not. I didn't have that agreement with John, but I'm not sharing. You just need to order it. It's hard. The book needs to be ready now. It is very, very, very good.
And that's why even like, you know, so since that, like we kind of did that 1 week experiment of pre-orders, like I've actually backed off. I mean, I'll post about it, you know, maybe once a week or so, but I'm not hitting it hard like I was that first week, because even my publisher was like, hey, just like hit it hard for 1 week. Let's see how it does. But then you need to back off because you're either going to tire people out or they're going to get annoyed because they want it right away.
Yeah.
They can't get it. So it's like, I've even kind of backed off, and man, just by, you know, so here's the other thing, like any pre-order sales are counted towards week 1 sales. So that's why pre-orders are also important. So if you have, you know, 5, 6, 7, 10,000 people order the book, it all hits on week 1, and that's how you get on like a bestseller list.
That's cool. I did not know that.
Yeah. So that's why like I still am hoping people pre-order the book because you know, you're never going to get on the New York Times bestseller list or anything like that if you don't have good pre-orders. And so pre-orders are an automatic signal that like people care about this, people want to talk about this, people want to read this.
Yeah.
So I would ask, if you're interested, please pre-order. It would mean a lot to me. And then you can go to findrestnow.com and it'll tell you everything about how to buy the book and how to get it. Maybe if you're if you are a pastor or in the church, there's also for bulk orders where you get, it's kind of a crazy discount. You get like over 30% off if you buy just all you have to do is buy like 25.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I was a little surprised. I was like, this is great. I thought it would be like you have to buy 100 to get this discount, but just a minimum order of 25 and you get, 30, I think it's 32%, and then it keeps going up the more you buy.
Wow. Yeah. And I know the book and I'm very honest and open with people. Hey, look, I'm a Christian. I have a strong faith. Much of my routine, much of my things are rooted in that.
Yeah.
Almost everything, actually. God is first, then my wife, then my kids, and that may not be in alignment with everybody who's listening's order. But I'm challenging you, even if you're not a Christian, or you struggle with Christianity, or you see some hypocrisy, or you see something that you hate or dislike. I'm challenging those people to pick it up and read it, because I think there's going to, even to the non-believer, there's a ton of stuff in there that's incredible, but I think it'll answer a lot of questions and get rid of some of that, like why, churches are evil, they're doing this. And from an insider's point of view, I think it's very redeeming. And maybe, I think it'll give you some perspective to the reader. I think that.
Yeah, and listen, I think, as you know, Scott, like the answers that are in the book are not just have faith, are not like if you just turn to God, everything will be great.
Right.
No. There's a whole section about we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like here's all the physical things you need to do, like even down to like you need to be volunteering. Like you need to be taking a shower regularly. Like I try to get as practical as possible, things that have helped me, maybe even if you're not a person of faith, that I think will help you. And then, like you said, hopefully you will at least see and come to understand how a person of faith can battle this, and then and take what you feel like is helpful for you. Yeah.
It's awesome. I agree. So they can find your book, Finding Rest. It's on Amazon, obviously.
Yep.
They should go and pre-order right away. They can find you on Facebook, Instagram.
Yeah, and even if you just if you go to that findrestnow.com,
all the links are there.
Everything will be there.
All right.
But I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. But you can. That's kind of like the one landing page where you can read reviews. You can actually, if you go there now, you can read the first 2 chapters for free.
No fair.
So,
they're good.
Yeah, you can read the introduction in chapter 1 for free if you go there now. So, and then I'll be announcing just some other offers, especially for those who pre-ordered the book. I'm working with my publisher right now on a study guide. Very cool. If you want to do it personally or in a group, and so by there's a Facebook group and stuff that you can have access to, and all that good stuff that we do.
Right on. Well, John, it's been a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this, so I'm glad we got to do this. Thank you so much.
We originally were just going to do it over Zoom, and we did it in person and rescheduled, and I am so glad that we did.
Yeah, me too. I was a little nervous, but I was like, I just got to make this work. I'm so glad I did. So thanks again for your time. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again, John, and you heard from his mouth, findrestnow.com, and that's where you can find everything. And, of course, order the book on Amazon. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Brotherhood of Fatherhood podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, your family, and follow us on social media. If you are a father, make sure you join our Facebook group, the Brotherhood of Fatherhood. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more podcasts from the Brotherhood of Fatherhood.